So it's really simple, this design. I've dropped everything today to stitch our Queen's head in memory of her, and it just takes 3 different threads. You've got your bright check wire, you've got your pearl wire, and your passing thread. So here's our design I've pinned onto the surface now. Normally I would tack that on, but this is just going to be a line of the passing thread. So I'm using the passing thread 6 here, which is a slightly thicker one compared to the passing thread 4, and we're going to just start here on this very edge, and we're going to plunge straight into the tracing paper. So I'm going to take that needle down like that, and I'm just going to poke it through the eye of our passing needle, just a very small amount because you don't want to waste any. Okay, I'm just going to ease that through. Now that's pulled quite a lot through, so I'm just going to bring it back up through to the front. And what you do need to do is you need to turn over your fabric on your frame, and you need to just over sew that on the back. But for quickness, that's not what I'm going to do. I'll do that later. So you can just score along the lines that you're going to be stitching. Okay, so I'm just going to score to there for now. Okay, and our stitches are going to be approximately 3 millimeters apart, so I'm going to start off with a little one just close to the end, just here. Just make sure my thread doesn't pop out, and your stitches are almost back into the same hole that you've come up into. So you're just following your line of the design. Okay, sometimes you might have to tweak the passing thread to make sure that it falls in line with your design. Okay, so I'm just going to move that over this way and then just stitch it down just there, back into our hole. And your passing thread will potentially fall into the gaps, and that's fine. Okay, what you do need to be careful of is when you're going on the curves, for say the chin, that you might need to move it a little bit more and just do a few extra stitches. So I've cut the tracing paper up to there, but you can see that that is just needs to be a little bit higher, and might need an extra little stitching just there to make sure that it keeps its shape. So sometimes you might want to come back and do an extra stitch. Because you do want it all really nicely flowing, and you'll have to put extra stitches in here rather than the 3 mil apart. So if I just take that now and make sure that it just forms nicely around her chin, just there like that. Okay, so I'm just going to come up here, which is very close to that last stitch, which is there, so much closer here, and then I'm going to do another stitch just there into the bottom of Elizabeth's lip. And we're just going to do a little line here and a little line there. So we just want to create those lips. Okay, so we need to make sure that we do a stitch about here, and then we might want to tweak that with a pair of tweezers to get a nice little angle on the passing thread there. So we can always tweak a little bit afterwards. I'm going to do another little stitch right on the edge of the lips, and then into the dip of the lips just here. Okay, and then I'm just going to assess whether I need to tweak some of this. I mean, you could always tweak it afterwards, but it's best to tweak it first, try and get it right initially, and then you can tweak afterwards when you take the tracing paper off as well. So I've just got my tweezers and I'm just going to look at my design here, and we do just want to tweak that in a little bit there and then tweak that around a little bit just there. So now I'm going to carry on, and again, you know, we've done that stitch into the dip of the lip, so hopefully when you do this next stitch, which just needs to be in the perfect place, it'll pull it nicely into place, and then it goes up to the bottom of her nose there. So that's the bottom of her nose, and then again we just want to cut a line there that's around her nose. And the passing thread's really good because if you're doing curves, then it will nicely fall into a curved shape. And what you do have to be careful is that it doesn't fall into a curved shape when you want it to be more of an angle. So I'm just going to stitch that. I'm not going to bother too much about that edge because I need to get this right now. So I'm just going to pull that in there. I'm going to pull that down a little bit just here, and then pull that down a little bit to her nose, and then that's going to curve around her nose like that. So that's just going to come up here. Because you don't want to, you know, you want the nose to be the right shape. And then what you can do at the end is you can just correct any slight undulations that shouldn't be there to make it spot on. So we're just going to go up to this point now with our stitching. And again, there's a little curve, you know, a little angle there, which is just where her eye would be. And then we can go up. I think you know, there's a lot of royalists out there that will be devastated by the Queen's passing, but I think even people that aren't royalists, it'll be felt by them as well. She was an amazing person and served her country right up to the end. 2 days before, you know, she was bringing in a new Prime Minister, which was her 15th Prime Minister, who would be doing that at the age of 96. It's just absolutely amazing. So I wish Charles the best of luck in his new position. I've just gone over that one by accident, so just bear with me a second. So just need to pull that up like that. The thread just fell a little bit wrong. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to speed this area up so that you can see where I'm going with it all, but you know, it's not as slow, so I'm just going to stop the video there, and then I'll speed it up for you so that you can see how it's done. So instead of actually speeding up this part of the stitch along, I just thought it would be a really nice fitting tribute to just go over the life of the Queen and give you some of my favourite memories as well at the end. So in the United Kingdom, the Queen was officially titled Elizabeth II by the grace of God of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and of her other realms and territories, Queen, Head of the Commonwealth, Defender of the Faith, and obviously Defender of the Faith was as the head of church. But it was changed in 1947 to Elizabeth II by the grace of God of Great Britain, Ireland, and the British dominions beyond the seas, Queen, Defender of the Faith. Queen Elizabeth, in full Elizabeth Alexandra Mary, officially Elizabeth II. She was born in April 21 in 1926. That date's also shared by a friend of mine, and I'm sure countless others throughout the world. So she was born in London, in England, and unfortunately she died on September the 8th, 2022 at Balmoral Castle in Scotland. She was Queen of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and from February the 6th in 1952 to September the 8th, 2022. And in 2015, she surpassed Victoria to become the longest reigning monarch in British history, becoming a much loved and respected figure across the globe. Over 70 years, Her Majesty was a dedicated head of the Commonwealth, linking more than 2 billion people worldwide together. So in her early life, she was obviously Princess Elizabeth, and Elizabeth was the elder daughter of Prince Albert, Duke of York, and his wife, Lady Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon. As the child of a younger son of King George V, the young Elizabeth had a little prospect of ever acceding to the throne until her uncle, Edward, actually abdicated in her father's favour on December the 11th, 1936. He later became known as the Duke of Windsor. At this time, her father became King George VI, and she became heir presumptive. The princess's education was supervised by her mother, who entrusted her daughters to a governess, Marion Crawford. The princess was also grounded in history by C.H. Martin. Afterward, she went to Eton College and had instruction from visiting teachers in music and languages. During the World War II, she and her sister, Princess Margaret Rose, spent much of their time safely away from the London Blitz and separated from their parents, living mostly at Balmoral Castle in Scotland and at the Royal Lodge Windsor and Windsor Castle. It was decided that they wouldn't be moved abroad, which was one of the choices, and the mum and dad didn't want that. Early in 1947, Princess Elizabeth went with the King and Queen to South Africa. After her return, there was an announcement of her betrothal to her distant cousin, Lieutenant Philip Mountbatten of the Royal Navy, formerly Prince Philip of Greece and Denmark. Obviously, she had already met him and she had fell in love with him. The marriage took place in Westminster Abbey on November 20th, 1947. On the eve of the wedding, her father, the King, conferred upon the bridegroom the titles of Duke of Edinburgh, Earl of Merioneth, and Baron of Greenwich. They took residence at Clarence House in London, and their first child, Prince Charles, full name was Charles Philip Arthur George, was born on November the 14th in 1948 at Buckingham Palace. In the summer of 1951, the health of King George VI entered into a serious decline, and Princess Elizabeth represented him at the Trooping of the Colour and on various other state occasions. On October the 7th, she and her husband set out on a highly successful tour of Canada and Washington, D.C. After Christmas in England, she and the Duke set out in January 1952 for a tour of Australia and New Zealand. These were all things that usually the King would do, but obviously because he wasn't very well, Princess Elizabeth undertook these tasks instead. And then en route to Sagana, Kenya, news reached them of the King's death on February the 6th, 1952. Elizabeth, now Queen, at once flew back to England. The first 3 months of her reign, the period of full mourning for her father, were passed in comparative seclusion. But in the summer, after she'd moved from Clarence House to Buckingham Palace, she undertook the routine duties of sovereign and carried out her first state opening of Parliament on November the 4th, 1952. Her coronation was held at Windsor Abbey on June the 2nd, 1953. When Her Majesty acceded the throne, aged just 25, her life changed overnight from that of a young naval wife and mother to a busy head of state. She was to become known for her sense of duty and her devotion to a life of service, and it was an important figurehead for the UK and the Commonwealth during her life, both in crisis and in celebration. Beginning in November 1953, the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh made a 6-month round world tour of the Commonwealth, which included the first visit to Australia and New Zealand by a reigning monarch, because on their previous tour they'd actually not reached Australia and New Zealand at that point. So obviously that was their first port of call. This included, this was in 1957, after state visits to various European nations, and the Duke visited Canada and the United States. In 1961, she made the first royal British tour of the Indian subcontinent in 50 years, and she was also the first reigning British monarch to visit South America in 1968 and the Persian Gulf countries in 1979. During her Silver Jubilee in 1977, she presided at a London banquet attended by the leaders of the 36 members of the Commonwealth. They travelled all over Britain and Northern Ireland and toured overseas in the South Pacific and Australia, in Canada and in the Caribbean. On the accession of Queen Elizabeth, her son, Prince Charles, became heir apparent. He was named Prince of Wales on July 26 in 1958 and was so invested on July the 1st, 1969. The Queen's other children were Princess Anne, born on August the 15th in 1950, and created Princess Royal in 1987, and Prince Andrew, who was born in 1960, 19th of February, and created Duke of York in 1986, followed by Prince Edward. He was born on the 10th of March in 1964 and created as the Earl of Wessex and Viscount Severn in 1999. All these children have the surname Windsor, but in 1960 Elizabeth decided to create the hyphenated name Mountbatten Windsor for other descendants not styled Prince or Princess and Royal Highness. Elizabeth's first grandchildren, Princess Anne's son, was born on November the 15th, 1977. That was the year after I was born. The modern monarchy. Queen Elizabeth II is NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center. The Queen, seemingly aware of the modern role of the monarchy, allowing, for example, the televising of the royal family's domestic life in 1970 and condoning the formal dissolution of her sister's marriage in 1978. In the 1990s, however, the royal family faced a number of challenges. In 1992, a year that the Queen referred to as the royal family's annus horribilis, Prince Charles and his wife Diana separated, as did Prince Andrew and his wife Sarah, Duchess of York. Moreover, Anne divorced, and a fire gutted the royal residence of Windsor Castle. In addition, as the country struggled with a recession, resentment over the royals' lifestyle mounted, and in 1992 Elizabeth, although personally exempt, agreed to pay taxes on all her private income. The separation and later divorce in 1996 of Charles and the immensely popular Diana further eroded support for the royal family, which was viewed by some as antiquated and unfeeling. The criticism intensified following Diana's death in 1997, especially after Elizabeth initially refused to allow the national flag to fly at half-staff over Buckingham Palace. In line with her earlier attempts at modernising the monarchy, the Queen subsequently sought to present less stuffy and less traditional image of the monarchy, and these attempts were met with mixed success. Well, since that time, the Queen has, done so much to improve that opinion of her, and things have changed significantly, and now, everybody loves the Queen. The working Queen in her life travelled in the UK and overseas, and this dominated much of Her Majesty's working life before she became Queen. She'd said, "There's none of my father's subjects, from the oldest to the youngest, whom I do not wish to greet." During her reign, she visited every realm and every region of the UK, returning to some many times over. Though much of Her Majesty's daily working life was spent in contact with her UK and Commonwealth ministers and representatives, it was her presence in these places during her many official visits which carried the most significance for those who lived there. In her state duties, the Queen's famous red boxes carried the state papers which Her Majesty was presented with every day of her working life. Her duties, including formally agreeing to make bills into Acts of Parliament or laws, and she also had a special relationship with her Prime Ministers, meeting them on a regular, usually weekly basis. She was famously able to encourage or warn whilst always remaining politically neutral. They also knew they could actually tell her anything, and it would never go anywhere else. It would have been amazing to be a fly on the wall and have a listening to some of those conversations, wouldn't it? The Queen was served by 15 UK Prime Ministers during her reign, beginning with Winston Churchill in 1952, as well as many Prime Ministers across her realms. As head of state, she also acted as a diplomat and hostess, welcoming over 110 presidents and prime ministers to the UK on official visits. Most of those, she would actually entertain them at Buckingham Palace as well. Sometimes there would be over 100 or more people having dinner at one of the events. Patronages. The Queen saw public and voluntary service as one of the most important elements of her work. Her Majesty had links as the royal patron or president with over 500 charities, professional bodies and public service organisations, and these varied from well-established international charities to smaller bodies working in a specialist area or on a local basis only. As head of the armed forces, Her Majesty had strong links to naval ships, army regiments and air squadrons, both in the UK and throughout all of her realms. The Queen's patronages and charities covered a wide range of initiatives, from creating opportunities for young people. This included patronage, her patronage to the Scouts, which she's always been, and one of their things that we say is to God and to the Queen. And then to preserving wildlife and the environment. As the royal patron or president, Her Majesty provided vital publicity for the work of these organisations. Every time she visited, obviously, it would significantly raise their profile, and she allowed their enormous contributions to society to be recognised. Recognising her achievement across the Commonwealth, Her Majesty supported and encouraged achievement in many different ways. The UK honours system enabled her to confirm titles such as MBEs, OBEs and CBEs on people from all walks of life in public recognition of their merit, service or bravery. Recommendations were made by the Prime Minister's office, but it was the Queen and members of the royal family working on her behalf who presented tens of thousands of people with their insignia over the course of her reign. Some of them were very cleverly discovered. She said that's very important that the system does discover people who do unsung things that perhaps the local people know about, but nobody else does. And that's very satisfactory. She would always, some would be very famous people and some would be completely unrecognised people, apart from locally known. There are also garden parties at Buckingham Palace and the Palace of Holyrood House, receptions and other awards given in her name, and this allowed her to say thank you to just some of those who had made a significant contribution to the life of the nation. In 2014, the Queen's Young Leaders programme was launched. The programme aimed to find exceptional young people who were addressing challenges facing their communities and to support them in practical ways to ensure that they reached their full potential. Her family and faith, for most of her working life, the Queen was supported by the Duke of Edinburgh, who accompanied her on visits in the UK and overseas and was by her side for all of her ceremonial duties. From the state opening of the Parliament to state visits and annual remembrance events. Her Majesty raised 4 children whilst undertaking her duties as Queen, later welcoming grandchildren and great-grandchildren to the royal palaces. The Duke of Edinburgh was, in her own words, her strength and stay during her reign, whilst other members of the royal family offered vital support through their work in the UK, overseas, including accompanying her on many engagements and tours on performing duties on her behalf in later years. The Prince of Wales accompanied her to the state opening of Parliament and Commonwealth heads of government meetings. More recently, over the last 10 years, the Prince of Wales has been taking on board a considerable amount of her engagements, and obviously Prince William also has been taking on some of the engagements as well, just to allow her that time that she much needed in her older age. During her exceptionally busy Golden Jubilee year, the Queen thanked her family for their support, saying, "Our children and all my family have given me such love and unstinting help over the years, and especially in recent months." The Queen was also buoyed by her Christian faith, often reflecting on the perspective and solace it brought her, particularly during the annual Christmas broadcasts. For her 2014 broadcast, she spoke of what she had learnt from the teachings of Jesus. "For me, the life of Jesus Christ, the Prince of Peace, whose birth we celebrate today, is an inspiration and an anchor in my life, a role model of reconciliation and forgiveness. He stretched out his hands in love, acceptance and healing. Christ's example has taught me to seek, respect and value all people of whatever faith or none." In June 2022, Britain celebrated Elizabeth's 70 years on the throne with the Platinum Jubilee, which was a 4-day national holiday that included Trooping of the Colour ceremony, a Thanksgiving service at St Paul's Cathedral, a pop music concert at Buckingham Palace, and a pageant that employed street arts, theatre, music, circus, carnival, and costume to honour the Queen's reign. Health issues limited Elizabeth's involvement. Concerns about the Queen's health also led to a break in tradition when in September she appointed Boris Johnson's replacement as Prime Minister Liz Truss at Balmoral Castle rather than at Buckingham Palace, where she had formerly appointed more than a dozen prime ministers. Elizabeth was known to favour simplicity in court life and was also known to take a serious and informed interest in government business. Aside from the traditional and ceremonial duties, privately she became a keen horsewoman. She kept racehorses frequently. She periodically visited Kentucky, stud farms in the United States, and overall her financial property and holdings made her one of the world's richest women. I personally have never met the Queen. I've only seen her at a distance when we were visiting London for a couple of days and took the bus tour. On entering Hyde Park, we had to stop and the tour guide said, "It's Big Liz." You could tell he said it with fondness. It did make us laugh. My favourite photo of the Queen is where Prince Philip is dressed as a royal guard, and she didn't realise that it was him until she was passing, and then it hits her and she giggles like a little girl, and that's when the photo was taken. It was so endearing. But my most favourite story of the Queen is the one where there were 2 Americans on a walking holiday in Scotland, and they came across the Queen, didn't recognise her. She was with the Queen's former Royal Protection Officer, Richard Griffin. Chatting with the visitors, the American gentleman was telling the Queen where he came from and what was he planning to visit, where he'd been. And then one of them asked, "Where do you live?" To which she replied, she lived in London but had a holiday home just over the other side of the hills. "And how long have you been coming here?" "Well, since I was a little girl, so for over 80 years. And you could see the cogs going, and they said, "Well, if you've been coming here for over 80 years, you must have met the Queen," one of the Americans asked. To which the Queen replied, "Well, I haven't, but Dickie here meets her regularly." The Americans were very impressed with this and asked, "You've met the Queen, so what's she like?" So Richard, taking the Queen's cue, said, "She can be very cantankerous at times, but she's got a lovely sense of humour." The next thing, the guy comes round to Richard, puts his arm around his shoulders, gets his camera and gives it to the Queen and asks if she could take a picture of the 2 of them. But Richard swapped places and he took a picture of them with the Queen as well. And neither of them ever let on and then waved goodbye. And afterwards, Her Majesty said that she would love to be a fly on the wall when he shows those pictures to his friends in America. Hopefully, someone tells him who I am. She'll be remembered for her diplomacy, her wisdom, and by those who met her for her humour and how she put people at ease. Whether you're a royalist or not, the Queen was respected and loved by so many, and she was always there with guidance and reassurance. We wanted to mark this moment in history the only way we know how, in embroidery, with Queen Elizabeth II was a member of the WI and so appreciated many crafts, and that's why we created this beautiful Queen's head, which is just a happy moment. can take all these. You will have noticed that I've been taking out the little bits, and that's so that they don't get completely stuck underneath. You know, especially when you're doing these closer areas, it's much harder to get them out afterwards than it is to get them out before. So I've been taking some of them out as I've gone along. So the last bit that you need to do is just this little bit here, which is going to get plunged just there, and then it'll get plunged just here. Just pop back out again. Just trim the end off, because otherwise it's much harder to poke it through the needle if it's not a fresh end. Okay, so I'm just going to score that line there, and then just poke it down there. Just going to cut that off about there, poke it through our needle there, and then just make sure that I don't drag the whole lot through. Take it down. Okay, so this is the back of our neck, and we'll just stitch that down, and then that's all of the passing for the head, and we just need to do the last bit of passing for the hairline, which goes into the crown. That's the last bit of hair. Okay, so that's the back of our neck just there, and then we just need to do the hairline, which is that one just there. So I'm just going to bring up our needle about there, and then we'll take another thread down here, and we just need to make sure that we score this line like that, and then we can stitch it down. And then that is our hair all done, and we can start doing the bright check and the pearl then. We can actually take the tracing paper off once we've got to that stage. We can just form a nice arch just there. And then just plunge the very end, and that will be our hairline done. Just need to finish that needle off at the back. We've done one more stitch about here, I think, and we're good. Okay. Do a little stay stitch just there. It's easy when you're working totally on the front to do a stay stitch as opposed to there we go. We just need to plunge that down there. So I'm taking the needle all the way through because I've just cut off a little bit, and then it's much easier to take that in through like that. So that's our crown. So what I'll then do is I'll just pull these up, take all the pins out, and then I can take the tracing paper off. So I'm just going to get my tweezers and maybe, you know, ease it around some of these areas like that. All of that out nearly. There we go. That's all the face done. Just need to make sure. I'm going to try and take this off in one piece here, just like that. Okay, and then I can see where the head is as well. and where I need all the pieces to go. So I'm just going to guesstimate using this design, and I'm just going to lie it down and then put the piece down, lie it down and make sure that it's in the right place. So that's our pearl passing thread on our queen's head.